December 24th, 2019. A 911 call comes in at 2:14 a.m. from a small town in Georgia. The caller, a 23-year-old woman, is crying so hard the dispatcher can barely understand her. She's saying something about her husband, something about blood. By the time police arrive at the mansion on Riverside Drive, the billionaire is gone. His wife, a girl who worked at a diner just 4 months earlier, is the only one there. And her story doesn't make sense. Before we dive deeper, let us know in the comments where you're watching from. And if you're new here, click subscribe so you never miss our upcoming videos. This is the story of Marcus Whitfield and Jasmine Porter, a story that started with what looked like a fairy tale and ended with a mystery that would tear apart a small southern town and make national headlines. Some people said she was the luckiest girl alive. Others said she was the most dangerous. But the truth about what happened that Christmas Eve wouldn't come out until much later. And when it did, it would change everything. My name is Sarah, and this is True Stories Unfolded. What you're about to hear is based on actual events, though names and some details have been changed. To understand what happened on Christmas Eve, we need to go back 6 months earlier, June 2019. Jasmine Porter was 23 years old and working 3 jobs just to survive in Millbrook, Georgia. Diner waitress, library assistant, office cleaner. Her studio apartment above a laundromat cost $600 a month, almost half her income. Her mother had died from cancer 2 years earlier, and with no siblings and no father in the picture, Jasmine was completely alone. But she'd learned that feeling sorry for yourself doesn't pay the rent. Marcus Whitfield's world couldn't have been more different. At 41, he was the founder and CEO of Whitfield Technologies, a software company worth $3.2 billion. But money can't buy happiness. Marcus suffered from severe anxiety and insomnia, sometimes not sleeping for days. His ex-wife said he was married to his work, with no room for anything else. He had no children, few friends, and barely spoke to his family. His younger brother Devin worked for the company, but they hadn't had a real conversation in 2 years. In early June, his therapist suggested something radical. Disappear somewhere small and quiet, where no one knew who he was. Marcus chose Millbrook almost by accident, checking into a bed and breakfast under the name Mark Wilson. Marcus started eating breakfast every morning at Martha's Diner. The girl who poured his coffee had the warmest smile he'd ever seen. Her name tag said Jasmine. After a week, she started remembering his order. After 2 weeks, she'd bring it without him asking. After 3 weeks, they started talking. Real things. She told him about her mother, how much she missed her. He told her about his insomnia. She recommended chamomile tea. He laughed and said he'd tried everything. She said sometimes the trying was the problem, that maybe he just needed to stop fighting it so hard. It was the most profound thing anyone had said to him in years. By the end of June, Marcus had been in Millbrook for 3 weeks and still hadn't returned to Atlanta. They'd take walks through town, sit on the library steps during her break, and talk about everything. Marcus, who'd spent 20 years surrounded by people who wanted something, found that Jasmine didn't want anything from him, and he found that more valuable than anything money could buy. Over the next month, they grew closer. On her days off, they'd drive to the lake or walk through the farmer's market. When her car needed a $900 repair she couldn't afford, Marcus paid for it. When he found out she was behind on rent and about to be evicted, he paid off her debt and covered 3 months ahead. She tried to refuse, but he insisted. What Marcus didn't tell her was who he really was. By mid-August, he knew he was falling in love with her, and that terrified him because he'd been lying from day one. She thought he was Mark Wilson, a consultant with some savings. She had no idea he was Marcus Whitfield, worth billions. He told himself he was protecting her, that if she knew the truth, it would change everything. He wasn't wrong, but he was wrong to keep lying. On August 24th, Jasmine's landlord sold the building, and all tenants had 30 days to move out. She told Marcus over dinner, trying not to cry, said she might have to move to Atlanta, where housing was cheaper. Marcus felt something crack in his chest at the thought of her leaving. So he asked her to move in with him, just temporarily, until she found her own place. She looked at him like he was crazy, but Marcus told her the truth, or part of it. He'd been alone for a long time. Knowing her had changed something in him. He didn't want her to leave. Jasmine, who'd been alone too, who'd been working herself to exhaustion just to survive, who'd spent 2 years grieving with no one to hold her, said yes. Within 2 weeks of moving in, they fell in love fast and completely. By mid-September, they weren't pretending she was looking for another apartment. But Marcus still hadn't told her who he really was. In late October, things started to go wrong. Marcus's brother Devin tracked him down using a private investigator and showed up at the house. The argument was brutal. Devin accused Marcus of having a breakdown, of being manipulated, of making decisions that could destroy the company. He demanded that Marcus come back to Atlanta immediately. Marcus told him to leave. Devin threatened to go public, to tell the media that Marcus Whitfield had abandoned his company to be with some poor girl. Marcus told Devin that if he tried to interfere again, Marcus would remove him from the board. Devin left, but not before saying something that would haunt Marcus. You think she loves you for who you are? Wait until she finds out what you're really worth. That night, Marcus decided he had to tell Jasmine the truth. But before he could, something happened that threw everything into chaos. If this part is making sense, drop a comment with, "I'm still here." On November 2nd, Jasmine received a call from an unknown number. The voice was distorted, mechanical. They said they knew who Marcus really was. They knew how much he was worth. And if Jasmine didn't want something bad to happen to him, she needed to convince him to pay $500,000 within 2 weeks. Then they hung up. When she got home, Marcus was making dinner, and the moment he saw her face, he knew something was wrong. She told him about the call, the threat, and the demand for money. Then she asked the question he'd been dreading. Who are you really? Marcus sat her down and told her everything. His real name, his company, his net worth, and why he'd come to Millbrook. Jasmine listened without saying a word. When he finished, she stood up and walked out. Jasmine drove for 3 hours, her mind spinning. Everything she thought she knew about Marcus was a lie. But the more she drove, the more she realized something. Yes, he'd lied about his identity. But everything else had been real. The way he listened made her feel safe, looked at her like she was the most important person in the world. That hadn't been fake. Around midnight, she went back. She said, "You should have told me." He said, "I know. I'm sorry. I was scared." She said, "I'm still mad at you." He said, "I understand." She said, "But I love you anyway." They agreed to start over with complete honesty. But there was still the problem of the threat. Marcus called his head of security, Richard Chen, a former FBI agent. Richard said this kind of extortion wasn't uncommon. He'd work with the police to investigate, but they needed to be careful. For 2 weeks, life became surreal. Everything looked normal on the surface, but underneath was constant fear. The deadline came and went, with no payment. But on November 20th, Jasmine received another call. The voice was angrier. They said Marcus had made a mistake. Then they described what Jasmine had worn to work that morning, the route she'd taken to the diner. They'd been watching her. That's when Marcus made a decision that would lead to everything that happened on Christmas Eve. He decided they needed to get married. If they were married, Jasmine would have legal protections, access to his security team, lawyers, and resources. He proposed on November 21st in their kitchen. No ring, no romantic setup. He just took her hands and said, "I need you to be my wife. I need to know you're protected." Jasmine said yes. They got married 3 days later at the courthouse. No guests, no ceremony, just a judge and 2 witnesses. Simple gold bands from a Main Street jewelry store. After the wedding, Marcus updated his will, making Jasmine his sole beneficiary. His brother Devin found out through a news alert. A photographer had spotted them at the courthouse and sold the story to a tabloid. Within 24 hours, it was everywhere. Tech billionaire Marcus Whitfield secretly marries small-town waitress. The headlines were brutal. Gold digger, opportunist, con artist. Jasmine couldn't leave the house without cameras in her face. Strangers online called her every name imaginable. Millbrook split into two camps. Some defended Jasmine, others whispered they'd always known something was off. Through it all, the threatening calls continued. Richard Chen and FBI agents were trying to trace them, but whoever was behind this was using sophisticated technology. By mid-December, Marcus was barely sleeping again, his anxiety back full force. On December 20th, Marcus received a call from an old business partner named Gregory Morrison. Gregory said he knew who was behind the extortion: Marcus's brother, Devin. Devin had hired someone to threaten them, thinking if Marcus got scared enough, he'd leave Jasmine and return to Atlanta. But the plan had gotten out of control. The person Devin hired had gotten greedy, started making real threats, and now Devin was in over his head. Marcus went straight to confront Devin at his Atlanta house. Devin tried to deny it, but Marcus had proof. Devin finally broke down and admitted everything. He'd hired a guy named Carl Stevens to scare them a little. But Carl saw an opportunity for real money and went rogue. Devin said he'd tried to call it off, but Carl wouldn't listen. Now Carl was demanding $1 million. Marcus gave Devin until Christmas Eve to fix this, or he was going to the authorities. Marcus made a plan. On Christmas Eve, he'd meet with Carl Stevens himself, with FBI agents positioned nearby. They'd catch Carl in the act, and this would be over. On the morning of December 24th, Marcus hugged Jasmine tight and told her he loved her. She begged him not to go through with it, but he said it would be fine. The meeting was supposed to happen at an abandoned warehouse outside Atlanta at 11 p.m. But 11 p.m. came and went. No Carl. At 11:45, Marcus's phone rang. Carl wasn't at the warehouse. The meeting location had changed. Marcus had 30 minutes to get there, alone, or the deal was off. Against FBI instructions, Marcus got in his car and started driving. But Marcus made a mistake. In his rush, he didn't check his phone battery. 20 minutes into the drive on a dark country road, his phone died. No way to call for help, no way to tell the FBI where he was. When Marcus arrived at the address, an old farmhouse with no lights, he was completely alone. He thought about Jasmine, about the life they were trying to build, and he got out of the car. Carl Stevens was there with two other men. They weren't interested in negotiating. When they realized Marcus didn't have money, that this was a setup, things turned violent. Marcus was hit, threatened, and tied to a chair. One of the men suggested they just kill him. For several minutes, Marcus genuinely thought he was going to die in that farmhouse. But then something unexpected happened. Devin showed up. He'd been tracking Marcus's location, worried about what his brother was walking into, guilty about everything he'd set in motion. When he saw Marcus tied to a chair, with blood running down his face, something in Devin broke. He begged Carl to let Marcus go. Carl laughed and said they were all in too deep. That's when Devin attacked Carl. It gave Marcus enough time to break free and run. Marcus ran through dark fields. No phone, no idea where he was. He could hear them chasing behind. Eventually, he made it to a road. A car was coming, and Marcus stumbled into the middle, waving his arms. The driver, an elderly man heading home from Christmas Eve church service, stopped and called 911. By the time the police and FBI arrived at the farmhouse, Carl Stevens and his associates were gone. Devin was there, beaten unconscious but alive. An ambulance took both brothers to the hospital. Marcus had broken ribs, a concussion, and a cut above his eye, but he was alive. At 2:14 a.m., from his hospital bed, Marcus called Jasmine, but he was so disoriented he couldn't explain what happened. He just kept saying he was sorry, that he loved her. Jasmine, terrified and confused, called 911 herself. The dispatcher sent police to their house to check on her, and when they arrived and saw how distressed she was, they took her to the hospital. That's how the media got the story wrong. Reporters heard about the 911 call, about police going to Marcus and Jasmine's house, and about Marcus being hospitalized on Christmas Eve. They didn't have all the facts, so they filled in the blanks with a story about a suspicious young wife. The headlines were vicious. Billionaire missing after Christmas Eve incident. New wife, called 911. But where is Marcus Whitfield? For 3 days, while Marcus recovered in the hospital under a false name for security, the world thought he was missing or dead, and Jasmine was the prime suspect. Her photo was everywhere. People who'd never met her gave interviews saying they'd always thought something was off about her. Police questioned her twice. She told the truth, but without being able to reveal where Marcus actually was. Her story sounded suspicious. Millbrook turned on her completely. Someone spray-painted "murderer" on their garage door. She received hundreds of death threats online. She sat in that house alone on Christmas Day and watched the world decide she was a killer. On December 27, Richard Chen held a press conference. He announced Marcus Whitfield was alive and recovering from injuries sustained during an attempted extortion and assault. He said Jasmine had nothing to do with it, that she was a victim just as much as Marcus. Some immediately apologized, but others doubled down, saying the timing was suspicious. The damage to Jasmine's reputation was done. When Marcus was released from the hospital on December 29th, he came home to find Jasmine sitting in the dark living room, staring at nothing. She'd lost 8 pounds in 5 days, her hands shaking constantly from anxiety. Marcus knelt in front of her and took her hands. She looked at him with hollow eyes and said, "I don't think I can do this anymore." Marcus understood. Not their marriage, but this life. Being subjected to scrutiny and judgment from people who didn't know her. By mid-January 2020, Carl Stevens had been arrested in Florida, charged with extortion, kidnapping, and assault. Devin Whitfield was charged as well, with lesser crimes. His cooperation led to a plea deal. 2 years in prison. The brothers didn't speak during the trial or after. Whatever relationship they'd had was over. Some media outlets ran stories acknowledging they'd gotten things wrong, that Jasmine had been unfairly vilified, but some never did, and the stain on her reputation remained. By spring, life started returning to normal. Marcus worked remotely from Millbrook. Jasmine went back to work at the diner, which surprised people, but she liked feeling useful. And slowly, people in Millbrook started to remember who she really was. In June 2020, Marcus and Jasmine renewed their vows. Not the rushed courthouse ceremony, but a real wedding with the few friends who'd stood by them. Just 15 people in their backyard, under string lights. When they exchanged vows they'd written themselves, Jasmine cried from relief. They'd survived something that should have destroyed them and somehow came out stronger. In December 2020, 1 year after the attack, Marcus and Jasmine went back to that farmhouse. They stood in the overgrown field where Marcus had run for his life, and Jasmine asked if he regretted any of it. Marcus said he regretted the pain she'd gone through, the way she'd been treated, but he didn't regret loving her, not for a second. Jasmine said she'd been thinking about how different their lives might have been if any number of small things had gone differently. Their whole future had come down to chance and timing and luck. Marcus said maybe it wasn't luck. Maybe they'd fought for each other hard enough that the universe decided they deserved to survive. As they drove back to Millbrook that evening, Marcus reached over and took Jasmine's hand. "You know what I'm grateful for this Christmas?" he asked. "What?" "That we're boring now. That the most exciting thing in our lives is figuring out what to cook for dinner." Jasmine smiled. Boring sounds perfect. Now, 5 years later, Marcus and Jasmine are still together. They've been married nearly 5 years, and by all accounts, they're happy. Jasmine graduated with her degree in social work and works at a nonprofit helping low-income families. Marcus stepped down as CEO and started a foundation providing funding for mental health services in rural communities. They never had children. That was a choice they made together. Instead, they focused on their community, on helping other people, on building a quiet life that felt meaningful. The media has mostly forgotten about them, and that's exactly what they wanted. Their story started with deception and ended with brutal honesty. It nearly destroyed them, but it also showed them what they were capable of surviving together. Sometimes the fairy tale doesn't end with a wedding. Sometimes it begins there, and everything that comes after is the real test. Marcus and Jasmine passed that test. They're still passing it, every day, choosing each other over and over again. And maybe that's the real happy ending. If you enjoyed this story, please give it a thumbs up and subscribe for more true stories. Let us know in the comments what you think about Marcus and Jasmine's journey. Thanks for watching, and we'll see you in the next video.